Hi guys, welcome to the next video on the chapter Nationalism in India. In the previous topic, we discussed about Gandhi's ideology and the First World War. In this video, we'll be discussing the non-cooperation movement. Now, when the First World War ended, the Ottoman Empire had lost and the Allied powers had won. So, the rumors were spreading that the Allied powers would come up with a very harsh treaty for the Ottoman Empire. Ottoman Empire being the Muslim empire. So, the Indian Muslims also had sympathies for the Ottoman Empire. And when they heard rumors that the Ottoman Empire could actually suffer a very harsh treaty, so they wanted to defend them. So, two brothers here, Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali, they decided to come up with a Khilafat committee which would defend the Ottoman Empire. So, Gandhiji also looking at an opportunity with the Khilafat movement that would start, he thought that this could be an opportunity for a big movement in India. He had already started the Rowlatt Satyagraha, which we discussed in the previous video. The Rowlatt Satyagraha had its limitations because it was limited only to the towns and cities. So, it being limited to towns and cities, it had not infiltrated the villages. With the big movement that Gandhi was thinking, he had thought that this could actually unite first of all the Hindus and Muslims as well, because the Indian Hindus will be supporting the Indian Muslims for Khilafat. And by leveraging Khilafat, they could also talk about Swaraj. So, the Congress decided in the Calcutta session of 1920 that we would support Khilafat and we would also fight for Swaraj with a big movement that they'll come up called the non-cooperation movement. Now, why it was called non-cooperation movement, we'll look at it. So it was adopted, the program was adopted in the Nagpur session. In the Calcutta Congress session, they had just taken the decision that they will support Khilafat, but the program that they will choose, that was decided in December 1920 in the Nagpur session. Now, the non-cooperation movement, the name the non-cooperation movement was decided by Gandhi because he realized one thing that, and he told it to everyone that the British had actually survived in India because the Indians were cooperating with them. So if we stop cooperating, then their rule will come to an end. So this was the thinking of Gandhiji. So he said that British rule was established and had survived due to India's cooperation. And when refused to cooperate, the British rule in India would collapse and within a year, Swaraj would come. So this is what Gandhi had thought about through non-cooperation movement. Now, the non-cooperation movement had thought to be in three stages. So the first stage being that all the titles of honors given by the British, they will be given up. So they don't want anything to do with the British, hence they will give up the titles and honors that Britishers give. The next stage would be to boycott public offices. So civil services, army, police. So in any way, the Indian population would not cooperate with the British. So educational institutions as well, foreign goods were boycotted. So this was the second stage. In the third stage, it was decided that people were not to pay taxes to the government. And if the British clamp down on them, then we will start a full-scale civil disobedience campaign. So this was the plan of Gandhiji in three stages. Now, the word Swaraj, which was used because we wanted to fight for Swaraj as well. So this had different meaning to different individuals and different regions as well. If we talk about towns and cities, it had a different meaning. In the countryside, it had a different meaning. And for some plantation workers, it meant something different. So we'll discuss how each movement, the non-cooperation movement in each part went about. Now, in the towns and cities, people decided to leave their jobs and education. So thousands of students and teachers left the government controlled schools, lawyers gave up their legal practices, council elections were boycotted except in one case where the Justice Party felt that entering the council was the only way of gaining power. So they went for the election in Madras and wanted to enter the Indian Council. So other than that, all council elections were boycotted. Then foreign goods were also boycotted. So they preferred khadi. So foreign goods would be boycotted, khadi would be preferred. Liquor shops were picketed, foreign clothes were banned. So Indian clothes would be preferred over foreign ones. So this was the movement that was happening in the towns and cities. Now, why it died? The main reason for it dying was economics as well, because the khadi that was chosen or preferred over the foreign goods, that was quite costly compared to the machine made cotton goods that were made by, cotton clothes made by, coming from British England. So because of this reason, people ultimately had to buy the cheap clothes. So this was one of the major problems. Another reason was that when the children left the schools, the teachers left schools, so the plan was that alternative institutions would come up which would support only Indians' interests. They had taken a lot of time. They were not coming up in time. So they were slow to come up. And because of this reason, the teachers and students had to join back. So this led to a failure in the towns and cities. Now, in the countryside, another movement under non-cooperation was such that in Awadh, if we take the case of Awadh, here peasants were fighting against the talukdars and landlords. So against the talukdars and landlords, because they were the representatives for the British government to them. To them, they were the ones who were causing them distress. So they were demanding high rents. They were the one for whom they had to do beggar and work on their farms without payments. So these landlords and talukdars were the one who were suppressing the peasants. So the peasants demanded that the revenue should be reduced, the abolition of beggars should be done, and social boycott of landlords to be done. So this is what their demands were, and the actions that they took was they started a Nai Dhobi band. So Nai Dhobi band would be Nai being a barber, Dhobi being the person who washed the clothes. So laundry service. So the plan was that not even barbers and washermen will be provided to the landlords. So we would make sure that the services to them are squeezed, and all Kisan Sabhas were set up where they will talk to villagers and understand the problems. So this is what the movement was in Awadh. Now, what against them in Awadh was that the Congress wanted to integrate the Awadh peasant struggle into the wider struggle of national non-cooperation movement. But what had happened is it had become violent. And the peasant movement had become violent, which obviously Gandhiji did not agree with. So the houses of talukdars were attacked, the bazaars were being looted. In many places, local leaders actually convinced the peasants that they could take over the land of the landlords, because Gandhiji had told them that the land will be distributed among us. So the peasants, being naive, went for that, and actually it went to quite a violent struggle in Awadh, which the Congress ultimately was not happy with, and hence they wanted to call off that. Now, in Gudem Hills in Andhra Pradesh, a similar movement was happening where the government had closed the forest areas. So the people in the hill areas, they had to graze their cattle, they had to collect fuel wood and fruits. So this enraged them, because now they could not enter the forest areas, and hence their livelihood was affected. So the enraged hill people actually revolted against the government, led by Sitaram Raju. So he was the one who revolted primarily against the government and persuaded people to give up drinking and wear khaki. So this is a movement that was being on lines with the non-cooperation movement. Use of force was necessary. This was the main concern again with the Congress, that again people were not ready to be non-violent. Any form of suppression they saw, they went violent. So police stations were attacked, guerrilla warfare was carried. So all this was troubling them. And similarly, in the case of plantation workers in Assam, For them, Swaraj meant that they could get freedom. So there was an Inland Immigration Act where plantation workers were not permitted to leave gardens without permission. Tea gardens, for them, they could not leave them. Now, what freedom meant to these plantation workers was simply that they could simply move in and out of the space. They didn't have to ask for permission, and they wanted to go back to the village they came from. And under the Swaraj movement, thousands of workers defied authorities. Then they wanted to go home, so they left the plantations without telling the authorities and wanted to go home. But what actually happened is that they did not reach home and they were caught by the police and beaten. So they were under the pretense that Gandhi would provide them their own land in the village. But all these rumors and all actually turned quite violent, and the protests in towns, the protests in villages, the protests in plantations were getting quite violent. So this made Gandhi withdraw the movement. So this was the end of non-cooperation movement. In the next video, we'll be discussing the civil disobedience movement.